From the launch of the Alouette satellite in the 1960s to the development of Telesat and the Canadarm, Canada has a long history in space, and that tradition does continue, with space industries in this country contributing billions to the national economy. But there is potential for more, which is why Space Canada is holding its third annual conference this week in Ottawa, coming together to share ideas and to lobby leaders about the importance of investing in space industries. Now, yesterday, I did speak about the conference with former New Brunswick Premier Brian Gallant, who these days heads up Space Canada. Brian Gallant, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Now, we should say that Space Canada represents some 80 different entities, corporations, NGOs, all in the space sector. And when we talk about that, I think what's probably frustrating for people in the sector is that when you ask the average Canadian what is the economic advantage, very few people would answer space. Does that frustrate you?
So in a way, sure, but you got to put in context, and we get it. Space is so fascinating, and every time there's an exploration mission, whenever there's an astronaut going to space, when we have somebody like CSA astronaut Jeremy Hansen that's a part of the Artemis mission, that takes up all the space, pardon the pun, and all the oxygen, pardon the pun. So we get that, and we're proud of that, and we hope it inspires people to be curious about STEM, curious about science, curious about our universe, and also curious about space, including the space sector. Because you're right to say that although that takes up a lot of the space, there's so much going on when it comes to economic activity for space, and it's increasing in importance. And over the next few years, there's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars added to the space sector globally speaking, and Canada, I think, can set itself up to reap some of those opportunities, seize those opportunities with our rich history in space.
Okay, let's build on that because, for the past few years, Space Canada has been lobbying the government to come up with a National Space Council. Budget 24 comes out, money set aside to essentially create that for this country. What is the economic advantage of having a Space Council?
So it's interesting. I mean, it's not a very kind of sexy item because it's governance.
Maybe for Ottawa.
Yeah, exactly. In the bubble, maybe. But it's really a governance question that is important. So 60 years ago when we were doing things in space, humanity was venturing, and it was government-led. It was all government-funded. Over the years, there's, of course, some businesses that started to get into space, but now there's a real emergence of a commercialization of space. The functions of space can really have an impact on our economy, on our environment, on our social fabric. It can help connectivity in rural, remote, indigenous, northern communities. I mean, there's just so many applications that will better our lives on Earth. So with that in mind, we certainly would like to have the government be able to kind of get their ducks in a row when at a time when the governance of space has changed immensely for everyone, not just Canada. So the U.S. created a National Space Council. It has served to bring cabinet ministers, secretaries in their case, to the table, bring all the right people. In their case, they bring the vice president, and they make decisions regarding space policy, space investments, national security questions from a space point of view. So we've been advocating for the same thing. Now, after that, we'll like to see the government create a commercial space strategy. We'd like to see some investments. There's all that good stuff. But we also recognize we just sort of got to figure out the governance of space, given it's such an emerging market and it's morphed so much over the last few years.
Okay, so the establishment of the council, the money's been set aside, obviously work to do. But at the end of the day, when you talk about, for example, an economic advantage, just how large of an economic advantage are we talking about? Because at the end of the day, Canada is a country of 41 million people. We're not that large.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There's actually a report released by Deloitte earlier this year. We worked with them on this report, and they were looking at the economic opportunity. And essentially, there's predictions that from now to 2040, the global space sector would be $1 trillion to $2 trillion. Right now, it's a few hundred billion. So it's projected to grow immensely over the next decade and a half. If Canada, according to Deloitte, could seize the same percentage that it has of the global GDP, as in 2040, when it comes to space, we'd have a $40 billion space industry by 2040. So 40 by 40, which is pretty catchy. So we really like that because that's not even sort of punching above our weight. That's literally just saying, hey, Canada, why don't we look at this emerging industry about to be $1 trillion, potentially $2 trillion a year, and just grab the percentage that we already have of the global economy. So it's not even saying let's go that far out and sort of stretch our abilities. This is really just get the same weight of our kind of current standing in the global economy. So $40 billion by 2040 is pretty catchy, and I think it would be achievable and it would make a real impact.
And I guess the proviso is so long as the government keeps the eye, like the prize in the eye type of thing.
Totally, and I think the National Space Council is why we've advocated for it. We got to start with that, and we get it. So then after that, we commercial space strategy, figure out how other countries are investing in the industrial base of the space sector. How are they encouraging space businesses to be a part of some of the government programming, or maybe they're buying services and products from space companies instead of it all being sort of government-led as we sort of created archaically a few decades ago. That's just not the model that'll work now. So let's figure all that out. Let's look at procurement for space. Defense and space are sort of notoriously long procurement processes. Space is so innovative that if you're not quick and sort of asking for something and buying it, purchasing it, it's going to be outdated already by the time you get it. And we'd love really to see investments in startups, scale-ups, and our primes, our big businesses as well.
Are we late to the game, though? Because, when you look at this moment in time in history, traditionally it's been the Americans and the Russians. We have, in the last few years, seen China ramp up. We have seen India ramp up their space programs, even Japan ramping up the space programs. Are we behind the curve here? Are we too late to the game?
Yeah, it's such an important question, because first off, let's just start off with those countries that you mentioned. We should all be asking ourselves, those that can't work in space, figuratively speaking, like I do every single day, if you see these things happening with these countries investing and putting out programs for space, you got to ask yourself, well, why are they doing it, right? There must be some type of opportunity that they're after, and we're certainly trying to communicate as best we can to all key stakeholders here in Canada. There is mass opportunity, again, not just economic, to help fight climate change, to help protect our coast, to help protect our forests, our oceans, all these very important applications that we can do from space. So really, we as a country have had a rich history. We should be really proud of that. But every other country is now realizing that there are opportunities in space, and they're stepping up. So we can't be complacent. I think, the exact numbers, a few decades ago, 30 years ago or so, there was, I think, six spacefaring nations with space agencies. Now people are saying it's up to 90. So you see people really stepping up, and if Canada kind of sits around and says, we were very good, we did the Canada arm, we have all these sort of impressive things, that's all really good, and it shows that we're capable of doing it. But if we don't make the investments, if we don't get together through a National Space Council and figure this out, you're right to say the opportunities will pass us by.
Okay. Well, things to consider as Spacebound gets underway. Brian Gallant, thank you for this.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.